spider fairy. He wears brown deerskin leggings with long, soft fringes on either side. Iktomi and the ducks. Iktomi is a spider fairy. He wears brown deerskin leggings with long, soft fringes on either side, and tiny beaded moccasins on his feet. His long black hair is parted in the middle and wrapped with red bands. Each round braid hangs over a small brown ear and falls forward over his shoulders. He even paints his funny face with red and yellow and draws big black rings around his eyes. He wears a deerskin jacket with bright colored beads sewed tightly on it. Iktomi dresses like a real Dakota brave. In truth, his paint and deerskins are the best part of him, if ever dress is part of a man or fairy. Iktomi is a wily fellow. His hands are always kept in mischief. He prefers to spread a snare rather than to earn the smallest things with honest hunting. Why, he laughs outright with wide open mouth when some simple folk are caught in a trap, sure and fast. He never dreams another lives so bright as he. Often his own conceit leads him hard against the common sense of simpler people. Poor Iktomi cannot help being a little imp, and so long as he is a naughty fairy, he cannot find a single friend. No one helps him when he is in trouble. No one really loves him. Those who come to admire his handsome beaded jacket and long fringed leggings soon go away sick and tired of his vain words and heartless laughter. Thus, Iktomi lives alone in a cone-shaped wigwam upon the plain. One day he sat hungry within his teepee. Suddenly he rushed out, dragging after him his blanket. Quickly spreading it on the ground, he tore up dry, tall grass with both hands and tossed it fast into the blanket. Tying all the four corners together in a knot, he drew the light bundle of grass over his shoulder. Snatching up a slender willow stick with his free left hand, he started off with a hop and a leap. From side to side bounced the bundle on his back as he ran light-footed over the uneven ground. Soon he came to the edge of the great level land. On the hilltop he paused for breath. With wicked smacks of his dry parched lips, as if tasting some tender meat, he looked straight into space toward the marshy river bottom. With a thin palm shading his eyes from the western sun, he peered far away into the lowlands, munching his own cheeks all the while. "Aha!" grunted he, satisfied with what he saw. A group of wild ducks were dancing and feasting in the marshes. With wings outspread, tip to tip, they moved up and down in a large circle. Within the ring, around a small drum, sat the chosen singers, nodding their heads and blinking their eyes. They sang in unison a merry dance song and beat a lively tattoo on the drum. Following a winding footpath nearby came a bent figure of a Dakota brave. He bore on his back a very large bundle. With a willow cane he propped himself up as he staggered along beneath his burden. "Ho! Who is there?" called out a curious old duck, still bobbing up and down in the circular dance. Hereupon the drummers stretched their necks till they strangled their song for a look at the stranger passing by. "Ho, Iktomi, old friend, pray tell us what you carry in your blanket. Do not hurry off. Stop, halt," urged one of the singers. "Stop, stay, show us what is in your blanket," cried out other voices. "My friends, I must not spoil your dance. Oh, you will not care to see if you only knew what is in my blanket. Sing on, dance on. I must not show you what I carry on my back," answered Iktomi, nudging his own sides with his elbows. This reply broke up the ring entirely. Now all the ducks crowded about Iktomi. "We must see what you carry. We must know what is in your blanket," they shouted in both his ears. Some even brushed their wings against the mysterious bundle. Nudging himself again, wily Iktomi said, "My friends, 'tis only a pack of songs I carry in my blanket." "Oh, then let us hear your songs," cried the curious ducks. At length Iktomi consented to sing his songs. With delight, all the ducks flapped their wings and cried together, "Hoye, hoye!" Iktomi, with great care, laid down his bundle on the ground. "I will build first a round straw house, for I never sing my songs in the open air," said he. Quickly he bent green willow sticks, planting both ends of each pole into the earth. These he covered thick with reeds and grasses. Soon the straw hut was ready. One by one, the fat ducks waddled in through a small opening, which was the only entranceway. Beside the door, Iktomi stood smiling as the ducks, eyeing his bundle of songs, strutted into the hut. In a strange low voice, Iktomi began his queer old tunes. All the ducks sat round-eyed in a circle about the mysterious singer. It was dim in that straw hut, for Iktomi had not forgot to cover up the small entranceway. All of a sudden, his song burst into full voice. As the startled ducks sat uneasily on the ground, Iktomi changed his tune into a minor strain. These were the words he sang: "Istokmos wasipo tuwaya tunwampi kinhan ista nisasapi kita," which is, "With eyes closed you must dance. He who dares to open his eyes, forever red eyes he shall have." Up rose the circle of seated ducks, and holding their wings close against their sides, began to dance to the rhythm of Iktomi's song and drum. With eyes closed, they did dance. Iktomi ceased to beat his drum. He began to sing louder and faster. He seemed to be moving about in the center of the ring. No duck dared blink a wink. Each one shut his eyes very tight and danced even harder. Up and down, shifting to the right of them, they hopped round and round in that blind dance. It was a difficult dance for the curious folk. At length, one of the dancers could close his eyes no longer. It was a Skiska who peeped the least tiny blink at Iktomi within the center of the circle. "Oh, oh!" squawked he in awful terror. "Run! Fly! Iktomi is twisting your heads and breaking your necks. Run out and fly! Fly!" he cried. Hereupon the ducks opened their eyes. There, beside Iktomi's bundle of songs, lay half of their crowd flat on their backs. Out they flew through the opening Skiska had made as he rushed forth with his alarm. But as they soared high into the blue sky, they cried to one another, "Oh, your eyes are red, red, and yours are red, red," for the warning words of the magic minor strain had proven true. "Aha!" laughed Iktomi, untying the four corners of his blanket. "I shall sit no more hungry within my dwelling." Homeward he trudged with nice fat ducks in his blanket. He left the little straw hut for the rains and winds to pull down. Having reached his own teepee on the high level lands, Iktomi kindled a large fire out of doors. He planted sharp-pointed sticks around the leaping flames. On each stake he fastened a duck to roast. A few he buried under the ashes to bake. Disappearing within his teepee, he came out again with some huge seashells. These were his dishes. Placing one under each roasting duck, he muttered, "The sweet fat oozing out will taste well with the hard-cooked breasts." Heaping more willows upon the fire, Iktomi sat down on the ground and crossed shins. A long chin between his knees pointed toward the red flames, while his eyes were on the browning ducks. Just above his ankles, he clasped and unclasped his long bony fingers. Now and then he sniffed impatiently the savory odor. The brisk wind which stirred the fire also played with a squeaky old tree beside Iktomi's wigwam. From side to side, the tree was swaying and crying in an old man's voice, "Help! I'll break! I'll fall!" Iktomi shrugged his great shoulders, but did not once take his eyes from the ducks. The dripping of amber oil into pearly dishes, drop by drop, pleased his hungry eyes. Still, the old tree man called for help. "What sound is it that makes my ear ache?" exclaimed Iktomi, holding a hand to his ear. He rose and looked around. The squeaking came from the tree. Then he began climbing the tree to find the disagreeable sound. He placed his foot right on a cracked limb without seeing it. Just then a whiff of wind came rushing by and pressed together the broken edges. There, in a strong wooden hand, Iktomi's foot was caught. "Oh, my foot is crushed!" he howled like a coward. In vain he pulled and puffed to free himself. While sitting a prisoner on the tree, he spied, through his tears, a pack of gray wolves roaming over the level lands. Waving his hands toward them, he called in his loudest voice, "Gray wolves, don't you come here! I'm caught fast in the tree, so that my duck feast is getting cold. Don't you come to eat up my meal." The leader of the pack, upon hearing Iktomi's words, turned to his comrades and said, "Ah, hear the foolish fellow! He says he has a duck feast to be eaten. Let us hurry there for our share." Away bounded the wolves toward Iktomi's lodge. From the tree, Iktomi watched the hungry wolves eat up his nicely browned fat ducks. His foot pained him more and more. He heard them crack the small round bones with their strong, long teeth and eat out the oily marrow. Now severe pains shot up from his foot through his whole body. "Hin, hin, hin," sobbed Iktomi. Real tears washed brown streaks across his red-painted cheeks. Smacking their lips, the wolves began to leave the place, when Iktomi cried out like a pouting child, "At least you have left my baking under the ashes." "Ho, po!" shouted the mischievous wolves. "He says more ducks are to be found under the ashes. Come, let us have our fill this once." Running back to the dead fire, they pawed out the ducks with such rude haste that a cloud of ashes rose like gray smoke over them. "Hin, hin, hin," moaned Iktomi when the wolves had scampered off. All too late, the sturdy breeze returned, and passing by, pulled apart the broken edges of the tree. Iktomi was released, but alas, he had no duck feast. Iktomi's blanket. Alone within his teepee sat Iktomi. The sun was but a hand's breadth from the western edge of land. "Those bad, bad gray wolves, they ate up all my nice fat ducks," muttered he, rocking his body to and fro. He was cuddling the evil memory he bore those hungry wolves. At last he ceased to sway his body backward and forward, but sat still and stiff as a stone image. "Oh, I'll go to Inyan, the great-grandfather, and pray for food," he exclaimed. At once he hurried forth from his teepee, and with his blanket over his shoulder, drew nigh to a huge rock on a hillside. With half-crouching, half-running strides, he fell upon Inyan with outspread hands. "Grandfather, pity me. I am hungry. I am starving. Give me food. Great-grandfather, give me meat to eat," he cried. All the while he stroked and caressed the face of the great stone god. The all-powerful Great Spirit who makes the trees and grass can hear the voice of those who pray in many varied ways. The hearing of Inyan, the large hard stone, was the one most sought after. He was the great-grandfather, for he had sat upon the hillside many, many seasons. He had seen the prairie put on a snow-white blanket and then change it for a bright green robe more than 1,000 times. Still, unaffected by the myriad moons, he rested on the everlasting hill, listening to the prayers of Indian warriors. Before the finding of the magic arrow, he had sat there. Now, as Iktomi prayed and wept before the great-grandfather, the sky in the west was red like a glowing face. The sunset poured a soft, mellow light upon the huge gray stone and the solitary figure beside it. It was the smile of the Great Spirit upon the grandfather and the wayward child. The prayer was heard. Iktomi knew it. "Now, grandfather, accept my offering. 'Tis all I have," said Iktomi as he spread his half-worn blanket upon Inyan's cold shoulders. Then Iktomi, happy with the smile of the sunset sky, followed a footpath leading toward a thicketed ravine. He had not gone many paces into the shrubbery when before him lay a freshly wounded deer. "This is the answer from the red western sky," cried Iktomi with hands uplifted. Slipping a long thin blade from out of his belt, he cut large chunks of choice meat. Sharpening some willow sticks, he planted them around a wood pile he had ready to kindle. On these stakes he meant to roast the venison. While he was rubbing briskly 2 long sticks to start a fire, the sun in the west fell out of the sky below the edge of land. Twilight was over all. Iktomi felt the cold night air upon his bare neck and shoulders. "Oh!" he shivered as he wiped his knife on the grass, tucking it in a bead case hanging from his belt. Iktomi stood erect, looking about. He shivered again. "Oh, I am cold. I wish I had a blanket," whispered he, hovering over the pile of dry sticks and the sharp stakes round about it. Suddenly he paused and dropped his hands at his sides. "The old great-grandfather does not feel the cold as I do. He does not need my old blanket as I do. I wish I had not given it to him. Oh, I think I'll run up there and take it back," said he, pointing his long chin toward the gray stone. Iktomi, in the warm sunshine, had no need of his blanket, and it had been very easy to part with a thing which he could not miss. But the chilly night wind quite froze his ardent thank-offering. Thus, running up the hillside, his teeth chattering all the way, he drew near to Inyan, the sacred symbol. Seizing one corner of the half-worn blanket, Iktomi pulled it off with a jerk. "Give me my blanket back, old grandfather. You do not need it. I do." This was very wrong, yet Iktomi did it, for his wit was not wisdom. Drawing the blanket tight over his shoulders, he descended the hill with hurrying feet. He was soon upon the edge of the ravine. A young moon, like a bright bent bow, climbed up from the southwest horizon a little way into the sky. In this pale light, Iktomi stood motionless as a ghost amid the thicket. His woodpile was not yet kindled. His pointed stakes were still bare as he had left them. But where was the deer, the venison he had felt warm in his hands a moment ago? It was gone. Only the dry rib bones lay on the ground like giant fingers from an open grave. Iktomi was troubled. At length, stooping over the white-dried bones, he took hold of one and shook it. The bones, loose in their sockets, rattled together at his touch. Iktomi let go his hold. He sprang back amazed, and though he wore a blanket, his teeth chattered more than ever. Then his blunt sense will surprise you, little reader, for instead of being grieved that he had taken back his blanket, he cried aloud, "Hin, hin, hin! If only I had eaten the venison before going for my blanket." Those tears no longer moved the hand of the generous giver. They were selfish tears. The Great Spirit does not heed them ever. Old Indian Legends, Section 3, Iktomi and the Muskrat. Beside a white lake, beneath a large-grown willow tree, sat Iktomi on the bare ground. The heap of smoldering ashes told of a recent open fire. With ankles crossed together around a pot of soup, Iktomi bent over some delicious boiled fish. Fast, he dipped his black-horn spoon into the soup, for he was ravenous. Iktomi had no regular meal times. Often, when he was hungry, he went without food. Well hid between the lake and the wild rice, he looked nowhere save into the pot of fish. Not knowing when the next meal would be, he meant to eat enough now to last some time. How, my friend, said a voice out of the wild rice. Iktomi started. He almost choked with his soup. He peered through the long reeds from where he sat with his longhorn spoon in midair. How, my friend, said the voice again. This time, close at his side, Iktomi turned, and there stood a dripping muskrat who had just come out of the lake. Oh, it's my friend who startled me. I wondered if among the wild rice some spirit voice was talking. How, my friend, said Iktomi. The muskrat stood smiling. On his lips hung a ready, yes, my friend, when Iktomi would ask, my friend, will you sit down beside me and share my food? That was the custom of the plains people, yet Iktomi sat silent. He hummed an old dance song and beat on the edge of the pot with his buffalo horn spoon. The muskrat began to feel awkward before such lack of hospitality and wished himself under water. After many heart throbs, Iktomi stopped drumming with his horn ladle and looked upward into the muskrat's face. He said, my friend, let us run a race to see who shall win this pot of fish. If I win, I shall not need to share it with you. If you win, you shall have half of it. Springing to his feet, Iktomi began at once to tighten the belt around his waist. My friend, Iktomi, I cannot run a race with you. I am not a swift runner, and you are nimble as a deer. We shall not run any race together, answered the hungry muskrat. For a moment, Iktomi stood with a hand on his long protruding chin. His eyes were fixed upon something in the air. The muskrat looked out of the corners of his eyes without moving his head. He watched the wily Iktomi concocting a plot. Yes, yes, said Iktomi, suddenly turning his gaze upon the unwelcome visitor. I shall carry a large stone on my back. That will slacken my usual speed, and the race will be a fair one. Saying this, he laid a firm hand upon the muskrat's shoulder and started off along the edge of the lake. When they reached the opposite side, Iktomi pried about in search of a heavy stone. He found one, half buried in the shallow water. Pulling it out upon dry land, he wrapped it in his blanket. Now, my friend, you shall run on the left side of the lake, and I on the other. The race is for the boiled fish in yonder kettle, said Iktomi. The muskrat helped to lift the heavy stone upon Iktomi's back. Then they parted. Each took a narrow path through the tall reeds fringing the shore. Iktomi found his load a heavy one. Perspiration hung like beads on his brow. His chest heaved hard and fast. He looked across the lake to see how far the muskrat had gone, but nowhere did he see any sign of him. "Well, he is running low under the wild rice," said he. Yet, as he scanned the tall grasses on the lake shore, he saw not one stir, as if to make way for the runner. "Ah, has he gone so fast ahead that the disturbed grasses in his trail have quieted again?" exclaimed Iktomi. With that thought, he quickly dropped the heavy stone. "No more of this," said he, patting his chest with both hands. Off with a springing bound, he ran swiftly toward the goal. Tufts of reeds and grass fell flat under his feet. Hardly had they raised their heads when Iktomi was many paces gone. Soon he reached the heap of cold ashes. Iktomi halted, stiff as if he had struck an invisible cliff. His black eyes showed a ring of white about them as he stared at the empty ground. There was no pot of boiled fish. There was no waterman in sight. Oh, if only I had shared my food like a real Dakota, I would not have lost it all. Why did I not know the muskrat would run through the water? He swims faster than I could ever run. That is what he has done. He has laughed at me for carrying a weight on my back while he shot hither like an arrow." Crying thus to himself, Iktomi stepped to the water's brink. He stooped forward with a hand on each bent knee and peeped far into the deep water. "There!" he exclaimed. "I see you, my friend, sitting with your ankles wound around my little pot of fish. My friend, I am hungry. Give me a bone." "Ha, ha, ha!" laughed the waterman, the muskrat. The sound did not rise up out of the lake, for it came down from overhead. With his hands still on his knees, Iktomi turned his face upward into the great willow tree. Opening wide his mouth, he begged, my friend, give me a bone to gnaw." "Ha, ha!" laughed the muskrat, and leaning over the limb he sat upon, he let fall a small sharp bone which dropped right into Iktomi's throat. Iktomi almost choked to death before he could get it out. In the tree, the muskrat sat laughing loud. "Next time, say to a visiting friend, 'Be seated beside me, my friend. Let me share with you my food.'" Old Indian Legends, Section 4, Iktomi and the Coyote. Afar off, on a large level land, a summer sun was shining bright. Here and there, over the rolling green, were tall bunches of coarse gray weeds. Iktomi, in his fringed buckskins, walked alone across the prairie with a black bare head glossy in the sunlight. He walked through the grass without following any well-worn footpath. From one large bunch of coarse weeds to another he wound his way about the great plain. He lifted his foot lightly and placed it gently forward like a wildcat prowling noiselessly through the thick grass. He stopped a few steps away from a very large bunch of wild sage. From shoulder to shoulder he tilted his head. Still farther he bent from side to side, first low over one hip and then over the other. Far forward he stooped, stretching his long thin neck like a duck, to see what lay under a fur coat beyond the bunch of coarse grass. A sleek, gray-faced prairie wolf. his pointed black nose tucked in between his 4 feet drawn snugly together, his handsome bushy tail wound over his nose and feet, a coyote fast asleep in the shadow of a bunch of grass. This is what Iktomi spied. Carefully, he raised one foot and cautiously reached out with his toes. Gently, gently he lifted the foot behind and placed it before the other. Thus, he came nearer and nearer to the round fur ball lying motionless under the sage grass. Now, Iktomi stood beside it, looking at the closed eyelids that did not quiver the least bit. Pressing his lips into straight lines and nodding his head slowly, he bent over the wolf. He held his ear close to the coyote's nose, but not a breath of air stirred from it. "Dead," said he at last. "Dead, but not long since he ran over these plains. See, there in his paw is caught a fresh feather. He is nice fat meat." Taking hold of the paw with the bird feather fast on it, he exclaimed, "Why, he is still warm. I'll carry him to my dwelling and have a roast for my evening meal." "Aha!" he laughed as he seized the coyote by its 2 forepaws and its 2 hind feet and swung him overhead across his shoulders. The wolf was large and the teepee was far across the prairie. Iktomi trudged along with his burden, smacking his hungry lips together. He blinked his eyes hard to keep out the salty perspiration streaming down his face. All the while, the coyote on his back lay gazing into the sky with wide open eyes. His long white teeth fairly gleamed as he smiled and smiled. To ride on one's own feet is tiresome, but to be carried like a warrior from a brave fight is great fun, said the coyote in his heart. He had never been born on anyone's back before, and this new experience delighted him. He lay there lazily on Iktomi's shoulders, now and then blinking blue winks. Did you ever see a birdie blink a blue wink? This is how it first became a saying among the plains people. When a bird stands aloof, watching your strange ways, a thin bluish-white tissue slips quickly over his eyes and as quickly off again. So quick that you think it was only a mysterious blue wink. Sometimes when children grow drowsy, they blink blue winks, while others who are too proud to look with friendly eyes upon people blink in this cold bird manner. The coyote was affected by both sleepiness and pride. His winks were almost as blue as the sky. In the midst of his new pleasure, the swaying motion ceased. Iktomi had reached his dwelling place. The coyote felt drowsy no longer, for in the next instant he was slipping out of Iktomi's hands. He was falling through space, and then he struck the ground with such a bump he did not wish to breathe for a while. He wondered what Iktomi would do. Thus he lay still where he fell, humming a dance song, one from his bundle of mystery songs. Iktomi hopped and darted about at an imaginary dance and feast. He gathered dry willow sticks and broke them in 2 against his knee. He built a large fire out of doors. The flames leaped up high in red and yellow streaks. Now Iktomi returned to the coyote, who had been looking on through his eyelashes. Taking him again by his paws and hind feet, he swung him to and fro. Then, as the wolf swung toward the red flames, Iktomi let him go. Once again, the coyote fell through space. Hot air smote his nostrils. He saw red dancing fire, and now he struck a bed of crackling embers. With a quick turn, he leaped out of the flames. From his heels were scattered a shower of red coals upon Iktomi's bare arms and shoulders. Dumbfounded, Iktomi thought he saw a spirit walk out of his fire. His jaws fell apart. He thrust a palm to his face hard over his mouth. He could scarce keep from shrieking. Rolling over and over on the grass and rubbing the sides of his head against the ground, the coyote soon put out the fire on his fur. Iktomi's eyes were almost ready to jump out of his head as he stood cooling a burn on his brown arm with his breath. Sitting on his haunches on the opposite side of the fire from where Iktomi stood, the coyote began to laugh at him. "Another day, my friend. Do not take too much for granted. Make sure the enemy is stone dead before you make a fire." Then off he ran so swiftly that his long bushy tail hung out in a straight line with his back. Section 5. Iktomi and the Fawn. In one of his wanderings through the wooded lands, Iktomi saw a rare bird sitting high in a treetop. Its long fan-like tail feathers had caught all the beautiful colors of the rainbow. Handsome in the glistening summer sun sat the bird of rainbow plumage. Iktomi hurried hither with his eyes fast on the bird. He stood beneath the tree, looking long and wistfully at the peacock's bright feathers. At length he heaved a sigh and began, "Oh, I wish I had such pretty feathers. How I wish I were not I. If only I were a handsome feathered creature, how happy I would be. I'd be so glad to sit upon a very high tree and bask in the bad gray wolves. They ate up all my nice fat ducks," muttered he, rocking his body to and fro. He was cuddling the evil memory he bore those hungry wolves. At last, he ceased to sway his body backward and forward, but sat still and stiff as a stone image. "Oh, I'll go to Inyan, the great-grandfather, and pray for food," he exclaimed. At once he hurried forth from his teepee, and with his blanket over his shoulder, drew nigh to a huge rock on a hillside.